we've got Mr. Harshpati Singhania, who's the Managing Director at JK Paper, joining in from New Delhi. Mr. Singhania, to start off with, if you could just outline what your broad expectations are this time around from the union budget, what do you believe the government can do to spur investment climate in the country?
Okay, on the overall budget expectations, I think the expectation is clearly that the budget has to be growth-oriented. And it has to bring back growth to this economy. You are seeing GDP numbers already. And that it has to spur growth. It has to also look at containing fiscal deficits through better targeting of subsidies, cutting back government expenditure, and looking at those kinds of things. It has to raise revenues through means which could be disinvestment, widening the service tax net, etc. But industry wants growth-oriented things, including higher depreciation rates, and so on. I think the last point I want to mention is basically the industry wants a stable environment where customs duties are not brought down further and where CENVAT rates are also not increased. So it requires this environment to grow.
Right now, Mr. Singhania, you have been quoted as saying that the paper industry is already going through a phase of overcapacity, both because of capacity additions and also demand not picking up to the extent. But FICCI, on the other hand, is talking about a lack of funds, which is acting as a hindrance in technology upgradation and the like. What is the situation? And from the paper industry's point of view, what are you really looking for?
As far as the budget is concerned for the paper industry, I think the industry is saying clearly 2 or 3 things. One, it is saying that you keep import duties at the same level and don't bring them down, because we are talking about an environment where there is slow growth, slow GDP growth, and paper industry growth is linked to the GDP growth. The second thing the industry has been asking is that bring import duties on fibrous raw material, that is on waste paper and pulp, to zero, because there's a shortage of fiber. And the third is bring import duties on coal down to zero, because paper industry uses coal for power generation and there's a shortage of coal. So those are 3 major things, apart from the fact that the industry has been putting forth its case to bring in some kind of a technology upgradation or a technology development scheme which the government can help fund.
Also, we do believe that some industry bodies are in fact asking for TUS scheme like the textile sector. In light of this, what is the extent of capex that you would need over the next few years, and how much of investment gap are you seeing on the same?
See, this is a good question, because the paper industry has been requesting for a similar scheme for quite some time. And fundamentally, the issue with the industry is that it needs to upgrade technology on a much larger scale. If we have to meet future paper requirements, for example, today the demand for paper in India is about 11 million tons. It's projected that by the end of this decade, the demand would be 20 million tons. Now, largely the industry has been able to meet all this capacity growth from the past by adding capacity domestically. But as it adds capacity domestically, it will also have to upgrade technology and bring in more environment-friendly technologies also. So all of these things require, and paper is very capital intensive, so it requires there to be some support from the government in mitigating and spurring some of these investment costs. Therefore, a scheme which will help support a technology upgradation scheme, by whatever name called, would be very useful for the paper industry.
Now, Mr. Singhania, imports from China have been a very real threat, and although we do have a 10% excise duty in effect currently, is the industry asking for additional measures? Are there any anti-dumping duties on the cards?
Well, basically what the industry has said, that don't decrease import duties, because if you're going to decrease import duties at this stage, it's going to be detrimental to the domestic industry. What the industry has also said, given the backdrop of what you mentioned, that we should have expeditious decisions in cases where of safeguard duty, of anti-dumping duties. We believe the response time in our system is too long, and by that time damage is already done.
And also, securing pulp supplies is an important factor for the industry. However, wood plantations have not been able to keep pace. Any measures that would help in shoring up domestic supplies? And as far as imported pulp, what support are you expecting from the government?
See, the biggest thing the government can do is allow plantations to happen in India, allow industrial plantations in India. Now, the industry has been trying to ask for a scheme for a long time. Basically, what is called a multi-stakeholder partnership, wherein the partnership is between not just industry but also the local stakeholders, the local communities, and the government. And the scheme very simply has been that you allow industry to plant on degraded forest lands. We have about 35 or 36 million hectares of degraded forest land, and the industry only wants about 6-7% of that to be planted. The lands remain with government. The industry comes in to help plant those lands, which will help to green the area, which will help in water conservation, soil conservation, and a whole lot of things. Plus, it will imply a large number of local people in the rural areas, in the tribal areas, and provide millions of man days of jobs. So really, at the end of the day, everybody comes out a winner. The local community, you're able to provide much more jobs, and employment is a big challenge. The government gets some revenue, it gets more green cover, and the industry gets raw material, hopefully at more competitive rates. So that is where, if the government can come up with a scheme which will allow this to happen within the framework, then that would be the biggest way to help the industry grow. I mentioned earlier that fiber has always been a big constraint in this industry in India.